What if there was a world where the Fey were real? Not only real, but had always been real. What if all the stories were true? What would that world look like? This week on Schedule for Launch, join me, Zach Walsh, as I welcome Neil from Bramble Games to talk about the incredible tabletop role-playing game, Fey Earth. Staying as close to the source material as possible, the Fey are threatening, powerful, and old. We talk research, setting, and history. Welcome to Schedule for Launch, a podcast to discover the projects that you may have missed. This week, I am very excited to be joined by yet another wonderful tabletop designer. Neil, thank you so much for coming onto the show this week.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking about Fey Earth a little bit today, and we're going to learn a little bit about you and how this project came to be. But before we really start digging into it, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Right, well, I'm from, if you can't tell from the accent, I'm from Ireland, originally born and reared in Dublin, still living there. For my bread and butter, I am a secondary school teacher. I teach maths and science to teenagers. Yeah. And when I'm not doing that, I'm either busy writing my very, very detailed 19th century alternate Earth TTRPG, or teaching people how to fence with longswords, which is my other hobby.
Really? That's exciting. Little fun fact, right before COVID started, I had paid to take a couple HEMA lessons, but I never got the chance.
Yeah. Now, I've been running a HEMA club in Dublin for, about 10 years now. We're one of the original clubs because, HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts, is obviously a massive hobby across Europe, but Ireland was literally the last place it got to, being the most Western spot, So you've got clubs in Sweden or the Netherlands or Germany that are 20, 25 years old, whereas my club is one of the oldest in Ireland because we were there from the start. It was in only the last 10 years or so that the hobby actually made it to our shore. So yeah, when I'm not writing TTRPGs, I am teaching people how to fence from translations of 14th and 15th century German fencing manuals.
That's so cool. I didn't realize it was that young though. The actual HEMA
in Ireland, yeah. People have been doing stuff for years, but HEMA as it is now, the formal kind of, or semi-formal sport / hobby that we would recognize as HEMA now, really only started in the late 90s. Yeah, it was people who had backgrounds in things like historical reenactment or maybe sports fencing, or in the US, I think it was a lot of LARPers and SCA as well, who were getting their hands on translations of the manuscripts. Historians and academics had been working on these, and suddenly, translations started coming out, and these people who's had backgrounds in fencing were looking at these translations, and I think I know what he's saying there, because of their backgrounds in fencing. So then they were taking the manuscripts and developing their own curriculum and systems based off of studying these translations. But yeah, it's only in the mid to late 90s was when it really properly started to happen, beyond a bunch of guys messing around with a random copy of an old book that they'd got, the people started really kind of studying it and developing curricula and the likes. And as I say, in Ireland, it's about maybe 10, 11 years old. So that's my other, that's when, as I say, that's my exercise hobby, so it's good.
It's funny because you said late 90s there, and that's kind of when the fantasy genre really started to pick up in the mainstream. So personally, I wonder if there's a correlation there, if it's becoming a little bit more socially acceptable. People watch films with your swords and sorceries were a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe, as I say, a big part of it certainly was the academic side of it, because we're not just making this stuff up. We are studying translations of manuals written by fencing masters in the 14th, 15th, 16th century. And from the academic side of it, those manuscripts were becoming accessible around the same time. So it might have just been a serendipity, or maybe one did feed into the other. I would say certainly that the growth in the kind of resurgence of interest in fantasy in the 90s, things like Robert Jordan's books appearing, would have definitely had people interested in this suddenly, and then looking, oh, is there a way I could learn how to fight with these weapons, which would have driven some of the early uptake of people into the hobby, you know? But, you know, it's kind of funny because it's like, you know, like the 90s, you also had like second edition D&D and all the rest of that as well was happening. Yeah. And then, you know, in terms of fantasy, we had those terrible Aragon movies, you know, and stuff like that. You know, amazing actors like Jeremy Irons looking horribly confused and uncomfortable on screen, pretending to talk to dragons and cast spells, you know.
Oh, let's hope that remake's okay.
Well, at least it's I never read the books. Like good. I'm 41. So I'm 41. So I was like a bit too old when the books came out to really get caught in that zeitgeist. You know, like I was in my teens when Jordan's books were coming out. I was that perfect age for that, and I made it through the first 10 books before I said screw this and just gave up. Like, which is more than a lot of people, in fairness, as I said. You're like, yeah, a lot of people gave up after book 4 or 5, but no, I made it to book 10. And I keep saying I'll go back because they did say Sanderson did an amazing job finishing the series. But yeah, so yeah, I don't know, maybe. But so anyway, yeah, that's me. When I'm not teaching people hard sums or researching fairies, I'm hitting people with steel bars.
And it's that fairy research that we're actually here to talk about today.
Yes.
So this has been something that a lot of listeners may have heard a bit about because it's been popular in the indie circles. But Neil, can you tell us what is Fey Earth?
So Fey Earth is my own creation. It's an indie TTRPG system, and it is set in an alternate 19th century Earth where basically every creature from folklore and fairy tale is real and have always been real and lived openly alongside humanity. So it's a world where magic has always existed and the Fey have always existed, living alongside humans. And the thing about it is, what really makes my game different to other games that try to incorporate the Fey into them is that I've really tried, and as much as I can, to be as accurate and faithful in my depictions of the Fey in Fey Earth as they were in the original folklore, in the original stories. So what makes Fey Earth unique is that if you play my game, you're going to find a lot of creatures that you recognize the names of. Your goblin, your hobgoblin, your brownie, your kobold, and so forth. But they are completely different to what people think of when they think of a goblin or a hobgoblin or a brownie, because my hobgoblin is based on the hobgoblin, which was a type of what I could describe as domestic fey, a fairy that lived in the home and would help out with chores and or maybe sometimes hinder, and they were from the region of northern England, Yorkshire and that whole area. It literally means the word hobgoblin comes from the hob, meaning the hearth or stove in the kitchen, and they were believed to live inside the stove. That's where hobgoblin comes from, you know. Kobold was from German folklore, you know, and like that's and the kobolds in my game are completely different to the kind of kobolds you're used to. Your, you know, tiny little dragon guys with 4 hit points. No. The kobolds in my game they're completely different. I always use kobolds as my example because there's a great story. I think it's originally from Dusseldorf. I'm not sure, but it was a story of a kobold that lived in the palace of a nobleman. And in German folklore, the kobolds, they would help around with chores and help around the house, and you'd leave them food or beer as offerings of thanks. And provided you were respectful to them, they would help you out. If you didn't show them respect, they could really make your life a misery, doing stuff, playing pranks, and being incredibly mischievous. They were always invisible, okay? If you gifted a kobold with clothes, they would then leave the house. So that would be probably where J.K. Rowling got the whole idea of, you know, the house elves getting their socks and stuff to freedom. And we don't just see that with kobolds. We see that in like house fairies in other parts of European folklore, like the classic story, The Elves and the Shoemaker. At the end of the story, when he gives the elves the clothing as thanks for what they did, they all leave, because that was a very common trope in European folklore. But in this story, a page boy or a servant in the nobleman's palace tricks the kobold into breaking its invisibility and revealing its true form. Because in the stories, the kobolds are always invisible. The kobold becomes so enraged by this, he rips the page boy's arm off and beats him to death with it.
That's a little intense.
That is, yeah. So that is what kobolds were actually like. They weren't some cute little dragon guy with 4 hit points, you know? And that's really, guys, at the core of what Fey Earth is about, you know? And it's funny because, and that's actually one of the reasons why when I originally started Fey Earth, because the idea of Fey Earth, literally one day I was pottering around doing something and this idea popped into my head of, what if we had a world in which all the Fey were real and had always been real? Mm-hmm. How would that world be different? And that was that what if question was that was where the idea of Fey Earth came from. And when I started working on it, at the time, I had gotten back into gaming. I originally started gaming in the 90s. My best friend in primary school, his cousins had taught him 2nd edition, and he got me into it. And I played that for about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years until I was about 15. And then when I was in my mid-teens, I stopped playing it because I enjoyed it, but I was realizing I have nothing to talk about with my classmates because all I do is spend my time playing D&D. And when I'm not playing D&D, I'm thinking about D&D. So I was like, I need to get other hobbies. So I basically took like a 20-year gap from gaming and then decided to get back into it. Mostly for mental health reasons, actually. I found that like my circle of friends had pretty much disappeared simply because I was in my 30s and life had gotten in the way, you know? Yep. You know, friends get married, they get different jobs, they move cities. Life gets in the way of things. Mm-hmm. And I was like, crap, where the hell did all my friends go? So I was like, I need to make an effort. Like, I'm not somebody who would be an introvert. I'm not an extrovert. I'm a fairly middle of the road kind of guy. I have my friends. Yeah. I go out for pints, you know. I socialize with people normally. I have no problem going to a party where I only know the host and I can just chat to people about stuff, you know. So I got back into gaming and I got back into TTRPGs. So I got looking at 5th edition, you know, having skipped 3.5 and 4th. And so when I got the idea for Fey Earth, originally I was thinking, okay, I'll make it as a 5e supplement, as a module, you know, sell it on Drive to RPG or something. And almost immediately realized I can't. This is not going to work at all because all of the creatures in my game already exist in 5e, but they're completely different. You know, they are completely different. So I was like, this needs to be its own TTRPG system. So I developed my own TTRPG system. Now, when I say I developed my own system, it's a fairly simple D20 system. You know, if you've played any D20 system, you can pick up the rules for this game in like 5 minutes, you know? And I would actually argue that it's better than other D20 systems because the maths is a lot simpler. Because my day job is teaching maths to teenagers, many of whom struggle with numeracy, I made sure to make a system that was mechanically very simple. So when you're playing in Fey Earth, the way it works is there's 8 ability scores, and your score in an ability is the modifier. So if you have a fortitude of 2 or a dex of 3, you're adding that 2 or that 3 to your fortitude roll or your dex roll, you know? You're not looking at a score and then looking up a table to see, well, what score does that translate to in terms of a modifier? And then you've got modifiers for skills, which is abilities that you have taken formal training in, like a weapon-based proficiency or maybe an academic skill like herbalism or something like that, you know? Yeah. And then you got your talents, which are like innate abilities. So like it might be something like you have keen eyes or keen ears, or you have might or persuasion or seduction. And they're simple +1, +2 modifiers. So it is literally every time you try to do something in Fey Earth, it's an ability check. So you're rolling your D20, add your relevant ability score. Do I have training in some skill that might assist in this? If so, add the modifier for that, based on your level of training, the more training you have, the higher the modifier. Usually at about a +4, you're like considered a master in that skill. And then do I have any other talents that would be relevant to this, And that the talents are usually a +1, +2 modifier. So it's flat mods that you're adding to, and then it's just add those numbers, roll my d20, and there you go, So as I say, it's a d20 system. It's not Pathfinder, it's not 5e, it's its own system, but it's very simple. I'm quite proud of the fact that the mechanics of it are very simple. You very quickly will pick up what you need to add to it, because everything is an ability check. There's only one type of roll in the game. You're not asking yourself, am I making a skill check or an attack roll or, an ability check or some other, am I adding modifiers because of proficiencies or feats or, it's like, no. It's very straightforward and simple.
I think that's a huge boon for Fey Earth, because I have friends who want to get into something like 5e, which realistically has it's not overly complex compared to some games, but it's still a lot of numbers, and their number literacy is fairly low for whatever reason. So something that's that simple as just like add the flat modifiers is a really great way to get somebody started on a very interesting game.
Oh yeah, like this is going to sound controversial, but I'll say it. I do not like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. I really don't. And yet again, it's like, as a educator, as a maths educator, it's not a simple system. It's like the maths is actually not that simple, and it's something that really annoys me, because I'll talk to people who play D&D, and they talk about games and say, "Oh, I don't want to try this sort of game because I don't want to put the time into learning a new system." Like, you've already spent hours learning a really, really complicated system. There are games out there that are absolutely incredibly amazing that have such easy, super rules-light systems. I mean, I know I'm supposed to be plugging my own game, but I'm going to plug another game here. One of my favorite, one of my favorite TTRPGs by the amazing at Black Girl Mage on Twitter. It's this wonderful game called No Bump in the Night. Okay, the entire PDF is like 12 pages or something, and the rules are 1 page, and it's like you're playing toys protecting your child from the boogeyman in the closet or the monster under the bed. And I love it so much. It's one of my favorite games, and the rules are 1 page, So when people turn around and say, "Oh, but I really don't want to I don't have the time to invest in any new system," I'm like, there are so many games which have such wonderful systems that are so simple that you could learn in 5 minutes. I would argue you can learn my game in 5 minutes, because like when I made the game, I was like, the only games that I was familiar with was D20 systems from playing D&D, and I did briefly run a Fantasy Age game. I don't know if you ever played that.
That was my first TTRPG.
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings about that system.
So do I.
I have very mixed. The mages in that game are just so crap. The magic system, but the mechanics, the stunt mechanics in that game were, oh my god, they were amazing. And that was a 3D6 system. So I was like, my only experience was D20 and 3D6. So I was like, well, which should I pick? And I did make a marketing decision. The single biggest TTRPG in the hobby is 5e. If I make a system that uses a D20 mechanic, somebody who already plays in a D20 system, i.e. 5e, is more likely to try it out because it's familiar, If it's kind of funny, because if I was actually making Fey Earth from scratch now, having fought, like I've been working on Fey Earth for 5 years, and I feel like I'm a much more I'm a much more experienced gamer now than I was when I started. And if I was going to make it now, from a marketing perspective, this would not help me, but I would probably use a dice pool mechanic, because I've really grown to love dice pool mechanics. I think it's an amazing way of running a game. So if I was gonna remake Fey Earth now, it would be as a dice pool mechanic. And I actually have a really fun idea. If and when Fey Earth is eventually successfully launched in through Kickstarter, in this one or whatever future ones I may have to run, and it's out there and it's published, I have an idea for a game that will be a fairly simple ruled like game using dice pool mechanics where you play Fey in like a Fey Wild Fey realm type setting.
Oh, okay.
So this would be a high magic game, but using an open magic system based off a dice pool mechanic. But at the moment, I'm just currently trying to tell everybody about my Kickstarter and get them to back it so that we can successfully publish this game. Because, as I said, like I've been working on it for 5 years, and the reason I've been working for so long is because, as I said, it's trying to be as accurate to the folklore. So I have spent hundreds, if not thousands, of hours reading and researching things like, translations of the first edition of the Brothers Grimm or other books on folklore, Calvino's books of Italian folklore, French folklore, Irish folklore, of which there's a huge volume. Like Ireland has some of the richest and most well-preserved folklore in all of Europe. And it's kind of funny because, like, as an Irishman, obviously, and as an Irishman who's also kind of into neo-paganism and history and all the rest of that, my knowledge of folklore is good for an Irishman. Like, we learn all of the legends in primary school, the Children of Lyran, Fionn McCool and Tindernog, and all that. We learn that in primary school anyway, But my knowledge of folklore would be higher than that again. But it was only when I was talking to other friends from other parts of Europe and doing the research myself, realized so much of Europe, the folklore wasn't preserved. Like one of my friends is originally from Switzerland, been living there for many years, and she's actually one of the players in my podcast series. And she played the character of Selena in our season 1, which is just coming to an end. Season 2 will be starting in November. Very excited about that. And like she said herself, they have some stories back home in Switzerland, but nothing on the level that we have in Ireland. It's like, and like I take it for granted as an Irishman. I'm like, wait, you don't all have your stories? And I was like, no, we don't. But that's part of why the game has taken so long to develop, because I'm reading books or academic papers by academic folklorists as the basis for it. It's like, okay, we're going to start working on dragons. I'll spend 5-6 hours trying to find academic papers on dragon folklore, or I'm reading Tolkien's translation of Sigurd and Fafnir, that's where I'm going to for my source material. It's not like, okay, let's make a cool dragon. It's like, no. When we say dragon, what are we talking about? So which is also then why, like, the Fey in Fey Earth are so powerful. And it was a problem from a game design perspective. I do actually have some magical creatures in the game that are not based on folklore, that were completely invented by me, because I very quickly realized a single diminutive fairy on their own could easily TPK a party of players of level 5 or lower in probably 3 rounds. If you give that fairy the powers that fairies had in the original stories, First round, they've blinded the fighter. Second round, they've withered one of the limbs of the spellcaster, so they can't use their arm, which means they can't cast spells. It's like, third round, they hex the rogue with terrible bad luck, so they trip and fall on their dagger. It's like, so I actually had to create magical creatures that weren't going to TPK a party under like 5th level, But yeah, so it's I guess a very much a labor of love from that perspective, trying to be as faithful as I can. But that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it interesting. Is that you're very quickly realizing that, okay, these stories are very old, but they're very different to the stories I'm used to from popular media and popular culture.
Mm-hmm. So you had kind of brought up the party there and how dangerous some of these Fey creatures can be. Who exactly are the player characters, though, in this world?
Yeah, so the 7, I call them professions, but the 7 classes basically in the system. You got 2 martial classes, your fighter and your gunslinger, and then there's a rogue class, and then there's 4 spellcasting classes. There's the sorcerer, who are like the academic, scholarly spellcasters. So they will learn magic by going to university and studying magic, or maybe being an apprentice to another sorcerer. Then you've got the mystics, who are the divine spellcasters. So they learn magic by becoming like a member of a religious order, if they're a member of an organized religion, or maybe they learned through like maybe there's more of an ancestral worship practice, so they learn through their family. Then you've got the druids, who are like nature based. The druids in my game, because like I didn't bother trying to create an historically accurate druid, because that's impossible, because we have no idea what the druids' practices were, because none of it has survived. So I've made up my own druids, and the druids in my game, they claim that they draw their magical powers from nature, and they act as like the emissaries between humans and the Fey. So historically, every royal court would have had a druid in the court as their advisor and ambassador for when they were for when the king or monarch was interacting with the Fey, And then the final spellcasting class are the witches. And the witches are really fun and interesting in that they have access to one set of spells that none of the other classes have, the ritual spells, and they have access to, they can make different types of minor and major amulets that give them particular boons and buffers and benefits. So examples of them might be, say, an amulet of the bear that like gives you extra strength, or a witch's bottle to protect you against hexes and negative magics and stuff like that. But the ritual spells that they have access to, which are also the only spells in the system that use material components, the other spells in the system only use verbal and somatic components. But the ritual spells and the amulets of the witch profession are all based on historical or archaeological examples of European folk magic.
Okay.
So if I describe, so like say one of the ritual spells is first level spell, Wand of Blasting, which is that you send out a beam of like of negative energy. It's an attack spell, and you're required to have a wand made of a piece of hawthorn cut into 3 strips and woven around itself with wax and pieces of amber wrapped in a piece of red ribbon. There is an example of such a wand in the Museum of Witchcraft in Boscastle in the UK that has survived from the, I think, early to mid 19th century, So like that's what so that's what I mean about it. So that one is very specific. With the other classes, it was like I just made some cool spells, and that's the way it works. But like I did another big thing about the game was I've tried to create a system whereby you can create highly customized characters. So another mechanic that I have in the game is a thing called feats, which are like special signature moves that you've got. And there's 3 types of feats: there's combat feats, spell feats, and social feats. And you use your feats to augment your actions. So the way action economy in the system works is you've got a major action and 2 minor actions in your turn. Now, your major action is your like action. You attack, you cast a spell, or whatever. The minor actions you can use for a bunch of different things. If you want to move, that's minor action. If you want to take a potion, that's minor action. If you want to say draw or sheathe a weapon, it's a minor action. Certain firearms require minor actions to reload, for example. You can also save a minor action to be able to use a reaction later in the initiative order if you want as well. And you can also use minor actions to carry out feats. So like with the combat feats, a feat might be something like disarm or knock prone or mighty blow. So you add an extra die to your damage roll or a quick attack. So if you want to use your feat, you must have training in the feat first of all, and then how it works is you declare before you roll, I want to use this feat. So you're using your major action to do your attack, and you're spending your minor action to attempt the feat. And then to attack, you basically have to hit or beat the defense score of your target. Every feat has a feat cost. So to use the feat, you must not only beat your target's defense, but beat it by an amount equal to or greater than the feat cost. Okay. So if you're trying to hit an enemy with your saber and they have a defense of 16, and you roll and you're trying to use a quick attack, saying that's like say a feat cost of 3 feat points. Well, then you have to beat a 19 in your attack roll.
Okay.
but your feat doesn't become activated, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so it allows you to have these signature moves. I love the idea of the swashbuckling swordsman who had that cool trick they could do with their sword that they were famous for. That's where the feats come into it. And if you're playing a fighter class, you get free levels of training in feats as you're going up. Every second level in the game, you get a free level of training that you can spend on a skill, talent, or feat. At every odd numbered level, you can increase one of your ability scores. Now, there's rules on how often you can increase, so you can't increase the same ability score consecutively and stuff like that. And each profession has primary ability scores, and then you got your secondary ability scores, and a secondary ability score can't be higher than both your primaries. But it's simple rules, common sense rules, okay? But the fighters also gain free levels of training and feats, so they're not having to burn all their resources on training in the thing that helps them do cool things that are about their profession,
Yeah.
Then for the gunslingers, they've got profession-specific gunslinger skills, like things like a trick shot or a sniper or quick shots, or so your quick shots, you use your minor action to do an extra attack, and like at low levels of training in that, your minor action might have to be, you can do an extra attack, but it has to be against the same target. And then it might be, it can be against a second target, but they have to be within 2-3 meters, And when you get to mastery level, you can be hitting anybody within range, And you got other ones like, say, arcane artillery, where if you have a magic score of 1 or higher, you can be tapping into that and adding it to your damage roll, so that you have some of the damage from your gun is considered magical damage. And there's another one where at mastery level, you're basically dead shot, and they can be hiding behind a wall 10 meters from you, but you can still hit them, and like that, the gunslingers gain free levels of training in gunslinger skills at certain levels, and then every even numbered level, they could take additional levels of training in their gunslinger skills, or they might decide, I want to get training in another skill that's not specific to the class. The rogues are kind of an interesting one, that you got a bit of choices in that. When you get to about 7th level, you get to choose the type of rogue you want to be. You can be what's called a Shadowcaster, whereby you learn access to spells from the Sphere of Twilight, which is spells to do with illusion, control of shadows, also things like teleportation and scrying. So you're developing a certain level of skill in those spells. Or you take the Shadow Master, which is basically you get extra levels of training in skills. And the rogues also have class-specific skills. So stealth, sleight of hand, picklocks, assassin, that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
And then with the other classes, the spellcasting classes, you've got the sorcerers have these things called arcane enhancements, which you can burn your resources in, or you get free levels of training in. So that allows you to specialize. So you do things like a quick caster, so you can use a minor action to cast a spell from a specific. You choose a sphere that you specialize in, and you can maybe cast a first or second level spell as a minor action from that, or spell slinger. So you've got extended range or enhanced recovery. So you get the magic system in Fey Earth is a spell point mana based system, and the sorcerers, if they have the enhanced recovery, they can get back a certain amount of mana at a short rest and stuff like that, The mystics, they at 5th level take a vow. So you might pick, say, the vow of life. So you're trying to you're a really good healer, you're trying to hurt people. The vow of justice. So you're seeking out wrongdoers. Or you might be the vow of righteousness. So your religion has a sacred enemy and you're trying to seek them out and defeat them. Or you could be the vow of supremacy, where you're I'm going to play a fundamentalist religious zealot and get everybody to practice my religion, Or, so you got that kind of stuff. And with that one, you gain extra spells at 5th, 10th, and 15th level and other boons. And provided you don't do stuff that goes against your vow, if you start doing stuff that goes against your vow, then you start losing those boons. If you start, and then it's up, it's not hard coded. I don't use an alignment system, but if you're supposed to be playing, say, a Catholic nun, and you're doing crazy stuff that the Catholic Church would heavily frown upon, your GM might turn around and say, okay, you're kind of taking the piss here. You're going to start having trouble with your magic, The druids are the way they get enhances is that the of the spheres of magic there's the 4 elemental spheres, and when you're a druid you pick a favorite sphere, because I personally felt every druid should have some level of bending ability. And that was just a decision I made in my system, and I stand by that decision. All druids are some level of bender, and so you get to be able to do things like, you obviously get to do things like wild shape, and then like you get bonuses to your favorite elemental sphere, free spells, extra damage. People can't resist it. Eventually, you can change into an elemental of your favorite sphere, and when you get to like super high level, like 17th or 18th level, which I know is epic tier, you can be like casting spells in your beast form or elemental form, which is pretty. It was funny. It was like, because in our campaign 1, which is almost finished, I have 2 episodes left. Episode 89 going up sometime next week, and then episode 90 hopefully going up the week after, but I don't know, because our final session was a climactic battle against the BBEG involving an army of ancient, corrupted, evil Fey who were the followers of an ancient god from Irish mythology that had been locked away in the Fey realm, and his followers were trying to break his chains and release him. And then the other side of it was the Irish army, because campaign 1 was set in alternate Ireland in the year 1849. So that was a big fight.
Mm-hmm.
That was a massive fight.
Yeah.
We played for over 7 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was but it was the final climactic battle in which my players were trying to stop an ancient god from being freed from his prison to culminate the end of a 5-year campaign.
Yeah.
We played those characters from 1st to 20th level, which you know yourself, very few people in this hobby ever get to say they've done that.
Yeah.
Like, virtually no one can say, I played a character from 1st to 20th level. So 7 hours kind of sounds crazy, but when you put it in that context, it's like, that's actually about right, So, so that's, as I said, it's going to be interesting when that eventually gets out. But when we were getting into like the final stages of that campaign, and like I had incredibly high level NPCs, 18th, 19th level NPCs, like one of the NPC allies was the Grand High Druid of Ireland. And I finally had her appear in a fight. And like 2 rounds into it, I have her doing stuff and using her abilities. And I was, holy shit, the Druids in my game are OP. Oh my God. I was like, what is it about Druids that any system that a Druid exists in, they are OP?
Yeah. I think one of the great things about Druids is that like everybody knows how scary the natural order of things can be.
Yeah.
Like, we're scared of natural disasters, and that shows in Druids.
Yeah, it was like this. The Grand Eye Druid, like as a minor action, was able to shapeshift into an ancient earth elemental, and suddenly had an extra 250 plus bonus temporary hit points.
Yeah,
and because she was 19th level, could use all of her spells in that form. And I was like, oh my God, this is so OP. Now, they were fighting a 4,000-year-old elf who was super scary, and 4,000-year-old goblins who, in that particular fight, when I realized how OP Druids are in my system, at 18th, 19th level, in that particular fight, that was a brutal fight. One of the goblins cast a madness spell on the party's healer, who's like one of the most powerful spellcasters in Ireland in that period, in that campaign setting, because she's like 19th level. Cast madness on her so that she thought all of her allies were her enemies, and she started attacking them. And then she cast madness on the other spellcaster, so that that spellcaster also thought that that their allies were their enemies. It was brutal. They ended up using up 2 legendary magical items that they had traveled into the Fey realm to get, that they were saving for the final fight against the god and his army. And it was, it was a brutal fight. So in a way it was like, okay, Druids are OP, but at the same time, this OP, ridiculously powerful Druid is just holding their own against these ancient Fey. Because the ancient Fey in my game are so crazy powerful. Unless you're like 16th level plus, you don't have a chance against them.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why if you come across an ancient Fey and you're below like 15, 16 level, you treat them with an awful lot of respect, and you're very polite to them, and don't piss them off, and don't do a Leroy Jenkins on them.
There's a lot of stories about people being rude to the Fae, so take
Yeah.
that with a grain of salt, listener.
Yeah.
Something that I really liked too, looking at some of the promotional material and some of the things you told me about it, was actually how you've built out the map of Europe, specifically the little write-ups on Arcadia and Jotunheim. You want to talk a little bit about those countries? Because we haven't even touched them.
No, we haven't. So currently, if we hit our funding goal and we publish the game, it will be set in Western Europe. But the reason it's set in Western Europe is twofold. First of all, I'm Irish, I'm Western European, and this game is based on folklore. So, in order of familiarity, I am most familiar with Irish and Scottish folklore, Norse and Scandinavian folklore, and then general Western European folklore. So I had to stick with what I know, you know? And so that was like the reasons why it's set in Western Europe, you know? And then, of course, I was changing things around. So I have the two Fey nations in Western Europe. There is the nation of Jotunheim, which is in the northern parts of what would be Scandinavia. So the northern regions of Norway, Sweden, Finland, as well as Siberia. So this would be the land that would have been traditionally where the Sami and Lap people would live. And in Jotunheim is where you have your frost giants, your trolls, your dwarves, your huldra, nixies, all those kind of like Scandinavian Norse Fey creatures. Okay, and then you have the Kingdom of Arcadia, which is basically comprised of the Black Forest region of Germany, the Alsace-Lorraine region of France, the Austrian Alps, and about half of Switzerland. So that chunk of country, of region in between, you know, north of Italy, east of Germany, west of France kind of region. And there you've got dwarves, elves, dryads, muslata, goblins, centaur, you know, those kinds of things, you know?
Yeah.
And they're both incredibly powerful nations. The northern Jotunheim region is like, in Fey Earth, it for a long time was not isolationist, but sort of isolationist. It didn't get involved in human affairs that much, and is slowly now beginning to get more involved in human affairs. It's trading more with human nations and the likes. Arcadia, on the other hand, was like a major hub of trade. So if you were a merchant and you're traveling across Europe, the quickest way to get from point A to point B would be through Arcadia. Especially because in Arcadia, you have these wonderful massive stone bridges spanning the valleys of the Alps built by the giants, you know? So you'd go across, as you're traveling to Arcadia, you'd pay the king's tax. And when you would pass any bridge, the trolls would check, have you paid your king's tax? And if you hadn't, you pay it. But once you pay it, you can pass safely. It's like the safest part of Europe to pass through at any period in history, because once you pay the king's tax, all of the Fey in the kingdom would know, oh no, they paid the tax, so we won't touch them, you know? So as a result, it's an incredibly powerful and wealthy nation. And like historically in Europe, that region was the region that was controlled by the Habsburg dynasty, who basically controlled the Holy Roman Empire for about like 400 years. And one of the reasons they were so powerful was because everybody was paying taxes to travel through their territories to transport their goods. So in this world, Arcadia has taken over that role. Now, in the setting of the game is specifically set in the year 1872, and the Franco-Prussian War has just ended. However, in my game, the Franco-Prussian War is different in that it's not a conflict between Prussia being pushed by Otto von Bismarck and Napoleon III, resulting in the overthrow of Napoleon III and the development of the Paris Commune and all that. It's different. It's an alliance between France and Prussia, because what happened was the ancient king of the Arcadia, ancient elven king, who ruled the kingdom for about 800 years, died of old age. Because the elves, the Fey in my game, they're not immortal, but they live for a long time. So they refer to humans as mortal because the human lifespan is considered so tiny. So the elves in my game have a lifespan of usually between like 900 to 1100 years, you know, about a millennium. So they live for a very So he'd lived for 800 years. He'd ruled this kingdom, this really powerful kingdom in the middle of Europe, and he has now died. And this is at a time in history when monarchies were still very much in charge of government. Like it was
Yeah.
only in the later 19th century, 1880s and 1890s, that you start seeing reform acts where men who weren't landlords and property owners were now getting the right to vote, you know? So the king of the most powerful kingdom in Europe, who had ruled it for 8 centuries, has died and his son has taken the throne. So Bismarck decides there's been a power shift here. Maybe we have a chance. What if we attack them? We can take some of this territory. France can try to take back the Alsace-Lorraine region, which was annexed by the Fey as a result of human-Fey conflicts centuries before. So France and Prussia attacks Arcadia. And because it's in the 1870s, and they're using later 19th century firearms technology and artillery technology, for the first time ever, the Fey army starts suffering casualties. They're not losing, but they're suffering significant casualties because historically, anytime humans had ever fought in a battle against Fey army, they are wiped out. Because you're fighting an army where their heavy infantry are giants and trolls and ogres. Their cavalry are centaurs. You know, their pike blocks and rifle blocks are dwarves. And that's before we talk about all the other magic things like your fairies and your goblins and all that stuff. So historically, they'd always got wiped out. But for the first time ever, the Fey are actually taking casualties and they're losing people in the war. And they're shocked. So the new king of Arcadia travels and climbs up to the peaks of the Alps and awakens the ancient dragons that have been asleep for centuries. And they come to the aid of Arcadia, and the Franco-Prussian alliance is destroyed, and Napoleon III still dies as he did in our history. And Arcadia wins. But now the dragons have awoken, and nobody in Europe has seen a dragon in about 5 centuries. And they are looking for their young that they had left when they laid their eggs before they slept. They're looking for their young that should have hatched and should be around Europe. And they can't find them, but they're hearing stories of medieval knights slaying dragons. And that is the Fey Earth that you will be starting with your players if you get the book. There's been just after this major conflict has ended, a huge war. There is now tensions. Some humans who are now very anti-Fey, other humans who are very anti-government, the monarchy, the bourgeois. You've got because in the 1870s you had the anarcho-socialistic political movement sort of developing as well. And you have these ancient and incredibly powerful magical creatures that have appeared that nobody has seen for half a millennia. So that's the world that you will be playing in when you play in Fey Earth.
Neil, I could see you're laughing. I forgot that my webcam was on, and I'm guessing you got a very good shot on my face when I realized just how high the stakes were.
Yeah. So and actually, so our first campaign, which as I said nearly finished, was set in the year 1849 in my alternate Ireland. Campaign 2 is set in the year 1872 in France, just after the Franco-Prussian War has finished. And my players who are making the characters, 3 of my players from campaign 1, my wife who played the character of Bronwyn Pritchard, who was the gunslinger of the party, my friend who played the character Selena, the party healer, and my friend who played Olaf, the dwarf in the party. They are coming back, and I have a new another friend of mine who played the source of the party will be coming back in and out as a kind of a recurring guest player, and we have a new player coming into the game, which I'm very excited about. Their characters, some of them, like my wife's character, she's going to be playing a druid who she's a Prussian soldier who was fought in the war and deserted, and trained and was trained in druidry magic by a Fey creature called a Moslute, which means moss person. German speakers, please forgive my pronunciation. They were a type of forest. They were a type of forest Fey. That they were from German folklore, more in the southern kind of Bavaria region. So much further south than Prussia, which was northern Germany. But they had an awful lot of commonalities with the stories and folklore and tropes that are associated with figures like dryads from the classical Hellenic mythology and folklore. The game will be starting in this exact time period where you've got, characters who themselves or their family were involved in this conflict,
Mhm.
and you've got these mixture of sentiments of some people who are now very anti-Fey and others who are now very anti-government. Actually, we talked about the classes, the professions in the game, but we didn't talk about lineages. In Fey Earth, you can play one of two lineages. I don't use races because I don't like the word race. It is highly problematic. And also as a biology teacher, I can say it's highly problematic. But there are two lineages in my system. There is the boring human, which is your human, and it's like they're cool. I actually like the humans in my system. Humans got a bad rep in TTRPGs. Humans can be really cool, Going back to the much maligned system that I don't like. The last time I did play a game of 5e, it was on a friend's one shot, and I played a human swashbuckling fighter, and I had so much fun with it, and decided if I'm ever playing a game of 5e again, I'm only going to play human fighters.
They're fun.
Because
I like getting that variant ability.
Yeah, but it was like fighters in 5e, I think, are actually a much maligned class that are highly customizable, more so than most of the other classes. Because with the other classes, you pick your subclass and that's it, And then humans are, a feat first level. So anyway, so the humans in my game, what you get is you get additional, how you get your boons and benefits are, you get additional skills and training. So like when you in character creation, you get skills and feats based on your background, based on your social class and what your family history was. Like maybe you were a lower class dock worker, or you were a middle class clerical officer or something. Now you normally there's like 2 or 3 skills and talents, and you pick one based on your background, but the humans get to pick 2. And that's how it works. And you get extra training in them at higher levels. But the other lineage is what are called the Fey Touched, which are humans, but they're humans who somewhere in your family ancestry, somebody had sex with a Fey. Basically. So one of your ancestors was a true Fey, and you have that Fey blood that's passed through your family line. So what that means is, first of all, you will have some physical characteristic that identifies you as Fey Touched. There's no such thing as passing Fey Touched, okay? So maybe you have slightly pointed ears. Maybe you've got green hair. Maybe you've got funny tinted skin. Maybe you're like 2 meter tall. Like my wife's character, Bronwyn, she was a frost giant Fey Touched. So we described her as a cross between Gwendolyn Christie and Tilda Swinton. So she was like 2 meters tall, had white hair, brilliant blue eyes like a husky, and her skin had this slightly bluish tint to it, like you'd been in the RC for too long. Okay? But she was instantly identifiable as Fey Touched, okay?
Yeah.
And the other mechanic that you get in is that you will get a +1 bonus to one of the ability scores based on your Fey lineage. So for her, because she was a giant kin, she started with a +1 bonus to her fortitude. If you're a goblin, it might be Dex or Charm or something like that, or whatever, But you also start getting a +1 bonus to your magic score. So your magic score is the ability score tied to spellcasting and magic. So if you're a spellcaster, it's the most important ability, okay?
Yeah.
And you need to have a minimum magic of 1 to be able to use magic. If you have a magic of 1, means you're born with the arcane spark. Also, your magic score is the number of cantrips that you know. So no matter what your profession is, you can learn cantrips in this system based on your magic score. Okay. So the other thing with the Fey Touched in Fey Earth as a group, traditionally are always viewed as in Europe anyway as kind of outsiders by wider human society, not always fully trusted because of their Fey blood and because they would have these innate magic abilities and the likes. But interestingly enough, in this 19th century period that we're in now, where the industrial era is happening, you've got the Industrial Revolution. You've also got Magitech coming into the world. Now, Magitech is in my game is mostly kind of not mundane, but it's more of a background thing, in that you've got industrialists who are asking artificers, can you make a furnace that's powered by magic and not by coke and coal, or pumps that use, kinetic magical powers and the likes, And you've got things like, like one thing in my game is like people say, what cool change you have in my game? The seas and oceans of Fey Earth are full of whales. And the reason they're full of whales is because their city lights that they use for their streets are enchanted fairy globes. meaning that they didn't need to hunt whales for the whale oil for their city lamps. So there's loads of whales in the oceans because this really simple, mundane thing of, oh yeah, we just hire artificers to make enchanted fairy globes to light our streets. Because, okay, they cost slightly more than, oil lamps, but you don't need to replace them. You don't have to pay for fuel constantly. So they actually, in the long run, are way cheaper, So you got that kind of stuff. But in the setting of it, because you've got this like drive towards developing magitech, you now have artificers who are looking for people to work as their assistants and apprentices. In order to use magic, you can't learn magic. You must be born with the arcane spark. You must be born with some innate level of magic. And magic in the world is rare. Humans, like humans, can be born with magic, but it's very rare and super rare in Europe. But all Fey Touched are born with the arcane spark. So the Fey Touched are now being sought out by artificers to work as their apprentices and assistants. So they're now finding that they're gaining this really important position in society that they never had before. And human society is having to start treating them with a lot more respect than they ever did before, because they're like, our industrialists and our capitalists want these products and we want lots of them. And you have this essential ability that allows you to help make these products. So it's like, conflict is the driving force behind our narrative. So as your GM, you've got other interesting social commentary and social conflicts coming into the game that you can play with as much or as little as you want, So it's just another aspect to the game.
I love the world that you built. I love how in-depth it is and how well thought it is. So I'm very excited to jump into Fey Earth. Like, truly I am. Neil, we're actually starting to run out of time, but I got two more questions for you.
Yep.
Yeah, we've been going the record's been over an hour, so I think this is going to be one of our longest episodes.
Sorry, once I start talking about my game, I can't stop,
I didn't even notice until like just now. Yeah. But first question that I have is kind of asked on every single episode here, and it's, what advice could you give to somebody who is looking to make their own game, but they don't really know where to start?
Start small and make your game about something that you're passionate about, not something that you think will sell. Mm-hmm. That would be my advice. Start small and simple, says the guy who has written my word. I haven't done a word count in over a year, but the last time I did, I'd written over 100,000 words. It's like the equivalent of 5 master's theses. I know, I'm nuts, but do as I say, not as I do. Okay, start small and make your small and simple is the best thing to do, and make your game about something that you are passionate about, because your passion is what's going to drive you. Because being an indie TTRPG creator is really hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard. I mean, no disrespect to all the wonderful 5e creators out there, because there's some amazing creators out there. But if Fey Earth was a 5e module, I would have launched my first Kickstarter 18 months after starting, and I'd probably be on my third. Like, that's the reality. Mm-hmm. That is the reality of how the hobby works and how much that one system dominates the market. So if you're working within 5e, just do something that you think is fun and cool, and you think fills a void that you feel is in that system. If you're going pure indie, start small, start simple. It doesn't need to be a massive hardback. As I said earlier in this interview, one of my favorite games is 12 pages, and it's wonderful. It's amazing,
it's super good.
So start small and simple and make it something you're passionate about, because your passion is what's going to push you when the Twitter algorithm is burying your posts and you're like, why does nobody see my stuff? Why is nobody downloading my thing? That's what the passion is. And reach out to the community, especially on Twitter. The TTRPG community on Twitter is got some amazing people on it who really are constantly trying to help and support each other. I wouldn't have gotten as far as I had without the wonderful community that is on there.
Yeah, I've said it before in previous episodes. The Twitter community around the indie TTRPG space is absolutely phenomenal. And I mean, if you want a short list, go check out the other 60 odd creators who have been on the show, because they're all wonderful people who will give you a hand Final question, though, for you, Neil. Where can people find more about you and Fey Earth?
The main place is Twitter, at Fey Earth, I'm also on Itch.io, at Fey hyphen Earth or underscore Earth. And then on Kickstarter, we are not, so as part of being an indie creator, I had to create my own PLC this year because I'm publishing myself. So I had to create a company called Bramble Games. So my Kickstarter is not through Fey Earth; it is through Bramble Games. So if you go on, if you go on the Kickstarter and just do a search, if you can get the app to work on your phone, because oh my god, it's such a horrible app.
It's a bad app.
But I use the desktop all the time. I don't use the app, but use the desktop. Go into the desktop and you find the Kickstarter there. Beyond that, as I say, I'm very active on Twitter. I'm just at Fey Earth, and I do have a TikTok account, Fey_Earth. But if you go on, please be kind. I am an elder millennial. TikTok is a foreign space to me. I do my best, but it is very strange. So that is where you can find me. I do technically have a Facebook page as well, but Twitter's your best place.
Braver than I, venturing into TikTok territory.
Yeah.
As always, audience, those links will be down in the description below. And as of today, Tuesday the 18th, you still have about 13 days to go and back this game. Go out, check out Fey Earth. Like, it's so cool. And, like, the world's incredible. There was so much I wanted to talk about, but we just don't have the time. Neil, thank you so much for joining me on the show this week. This was sweet. I loved it.
Thank you for having me.
And audience, thank you for listening. Neil and Fey Earth are currently backing, and they are scheduled to launch very soon. So go out there and support the work that he is doing, because it is incredible. Until next time, though, take care of yourselves. I'll see you on the next one. Bye. Thank you so much to Neil for joining me on the podcast this week. Fey Earth is currently backing on Kickstarter and will be for another 2 weeks. If you like the sound of it, then please check it out and show Neil your support. If you want to hear more about Fey Earth, though, you can also hear the story from Neil's own podcast. It's named the same thing, and it's on Spotify. Links in the description down below. And thank you so much for listening, audience. Thanks to your support, we're reaching that 2K download mark. Unfortunately, we're going to be taking a bit of a hiatus due to some scheduling conflicts, issues with work, and miscommunications on my part. I don't have any guests. The problem won't last too long, but I'd rather have a couple of episodes lined up rather than sporadically uploading whenever someone comes through. This does not mean I am abandoning the show, though. I just want to make sure that we have a couple of people lined up to come on the show, and I can upload in a row so that you all know what's going on. And I just want to be transparent. So thank you all for your patience. And really, this time, I do mean it. If there is someone that you think I should reach out to, please let me know so I can get them on the show, or at least offer them to come on. That's all from me now, though. Until next time, take care of yourselves. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.